Well, I'm very excited to welcome everybody to this next session at the Evolve Summit. My name is John Abraham. I'm with a company called Medallia. For those of you that don't know Medallia, our core business is as a software company. We provide a platform to allow companies to hear from their customers and from their employees in real time. And very excited to be with our guest speaker today. When I heard about the theme for this year's summit, we've been doing a lot of research at Medallia over the last 6 months around agility and how our customers have been using the platform that we put in place for many of these companies. How do they use the signals that they're getting from customers and employees to navigate when things are really changing quickly in the environment, as we've seen for so many companies during COVID-19? And that's really our theme for today and what our discussion is going to be about. I'm very excited to have with me today Tom Laymon, who's Chief of Care Delivery Operations for Atrium Health. And I am in particular was excited to have Tom join us because Atrium is one of the companies that I have been doing some research on to understand what they were doing in this very, very unusual of years for the healthcare industry. So Tom, welcome today.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here and share a little bit of our story. I might start off with Atrium Health. You might not know Atrium Health if you're listening in. Atrium Health is a large integrated delivery health system, located out of Charlotte, but we're in South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and really the Southeast. We're fairly big as healthcare systems go, about 65,000 teammates. We employ over 3,000 physicians. We have about 44 hospitals, but we like to translate that into a per day patient. And so some interesting stats for us is we try and focus in on each patient, but in every day we deliver about 88 babies. So when we're done, we will have delivered about four babies in this whole session right here. 31,000 patients we have a chance to care for successfully each day. And successfully complete over 500 surgeries in a day. So we like to really focus in on the individual patient, the individual episode. Even though we're big, we got to break it down for each patient and each encounter.
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to mention to those people who are tuned in, there is a chat panel here on the right. I'm going to do my best as we go through the conversation to monitor any questions that come in, and we'll try to get to some of those as we're going. So if we do want to hear from you, you can just type them in there on the chat panel on the right. Tom, I was thinking we're going to talk today about this connection between feedback from the patient or the customer. We have people tuning in from lots of different industries.
Yeah.
But this connection between the feedback and how that actually helps with adaptation and agility. So I thought maybe just as some quick background, you could tell us what kind of feedback situation are you guys in when COVID happened? I mean, did you already have feedback coming in? What was your operating cadence?
Yeah, really, we're a bit fortuitous in that a couple of years before COVID, our CEO, Gene Woods, who's a remarkable leader and visionary, also extremely dynamic, got rid of our patient experience department. Now that might seem a little bit weird on the surface, but he really called it out that it's a core competency. It's not a department. In healthcare, we like to departmentalize a lot of different things. And so we moved it to the front line. But in order to move it to the front line, we needed to have real-time, actionable information feedback. And so, as you know, John, we moved to the Medallia platform better than a year ago. And we got all 88 specialties and I think over 700 care delivery locations converted to the Medallia platform. That was important for us because we needed more feedback. That was important for us pre-COVID because we wanted to honor our teammates and our physicians and clinicians with what the patients were saying about them. We believe in them, and we believe that our teammates will respond. Most of the people in healthcare were called to this industry. And so we wanted to really make sure we were giving them what they needed. And so to have information where they remembered that patient and heard their words, whether they were resoundingly positive, and they are, or provided us critical information by which we needed to either change our process or behavior. And so we're able to provide that, and then COVID.
Well, yeah, what kind of upheaval? And it's It's interesting because we were speaking earlier and you mentioned every industry has seen some level of upheaval due to COVID. Now, in some industries, that upheaval meant they didn't have enough supply to meet demand. Other industries was exact opposite, right? But I think that's the one thing companies have had in common across our client base this year is the sort of rapidity of the change, and the disruption was so intense. So maybe we were hearing earlier from Arvind Krishna on the main stage about, he mentioned telehealth and telemedicine. And this is one of the biggest disruptions that you told me about that was going on in your business. Can you maybe help our audience understand how you use the feedback during this sort of rapid transition to telemedicine?
Yeah, not to over dramatize it, but you know, while we were also, like everybody else, looking out for our business livelihood, we're also called to care for patients' lives. And so the way we did it was weighty. And so we stood up 3 main core of virtual to try and keep the patients from having to come into the hospital, where most people, you know, would assume that there is a COVID environment, and we were really safe in our hospitals also. But that fear of going to the doctor's office when patients were suffering from cardiovascular disease or different comorbidities or metastatic bone cancer, and they needed to come in or they needed to be seen. And so we stood up the telemedicine. Certainly, we've done that for 10 years. Not a lot of great traction around it. We tried all kinds of different things. It just wasn't a receptor received very well by patients universally. And so we went from 400, let's see, what was it? It was 400 virtual telemedicine visits a week to about 400 every 30 minutes. So the adjustment in our business model, we had to train 1,500 providers how to do this, how to provide care or information or communication via tele. And so we were able to do that, but what we needed more than anything is understand, did the patients feel safe? Were they getting what they needed? Did they have an ability to give us feedback to say, hey, that wasn't good enough? And resoundingly, they said they really appreciated more than anything to not have to come in. Now, some had to come in, of course they did. But for about 40% of our business went to telemedicine. We also stood up a virtual hospital for COVID positive patients. We've cared for over 30,000 COVID positive patients. And again, kept them from having to go into the hospital. And we did, like a lot of health systems, went to remote testing. And so we've tested over 200 and some odd thousand patients remotely. Interestingly enough, John, one of the outcroppings of that was that we're able to now translate some of those things that we had to do into things that we need to do. And so now we're doing flu shots via car lines, and people would not have received that before. We tried different things like that. They're so appreciative, and the feedback that they're giving us is telling us that keep doing more stuff like that because it's important to us, and we're receiving it now.
Well, it's interesting about these. Bless you. I think we've got somebody with their microphone on, but we'll just keep going. As you talk about the feedback. So one of the things you mentioned was the rapid, ramp up of the telehealth. How did the doctors and the nurses, the frontline providers, how were they able to adjust to that? Were they using feedback at the front line? Were they too busy? I mean, what kind of dynamic did you see?
Well, as you know, we're actually able to put the feedback in their pocket via their phone. And so we monitor and measure and provide feedback to those who aren't using the feedback, who aren't looking. But you can see a direct correlation, John, to those who look at what their customers are saying, their patients are saying, to their scores. And I love the stories of those who weren't doing so well, saw what patients were saying, and adjusted, again, either a process or a behavior. One of the things that we did as a system was to start to analyze and use some of the segmentation of that feedback, and to use advanced text analytics and different theming to understand gender, language, race, age cohorts, and how they're receiving different modes and deliveries of our services. And then from that, able to either inform our clinicians that they need to adjust as an example, one of our major service lines, one of our really outstanding service lines, our best patient experience scores across the board. But men who are 65 to 74 weren't appreciating or really receiving the telemedicine. The women in that age cohort were, but men weren't. So we started to, as we made appointments, not offer those things to that group, or offer them in a secondary fashion. So a lot of different movement in both our modes of care and our modes of delivery that we're able to do. One of the things I love about the culture at Atrium is we really focus in on connected purpose. And that is really basically sharing with each other what patients are receiving, how they're receiving it. Most of them are tearjerker stories, so I couldn't read any right now for you. But to share that to the front lines, all the way from the patient's room to the boardroom. And those same stories, those same real-time feedback, we're getting affirmed, inspired, and in some cases, of course, corrected to do it differently.
Yeah. Well, we had a couple questions that came through. One of them, I think, is somewhat related to what you were saying earlier about your ability to segment and try to understand how the experience was different for different groups. This person was asking about, marginalized groups or other specific groups. How did that influence how you were doing things moving forward? And I mean, for today, we're talking about how the feedback helps you to adjust. Does that bring any other example to mind for you?
No, thank you for that question. I would be remiss if I didn't say that the end of our mission statement says for all. We are a community health system. We are the catchment and the safety net for basically the Southeast, but the largest one in the Carolinas for sure. And a couple things we did with that information and with that feedback was we noticed, and again, our CEO was very adamant about closing this gap of race testing, of testing COVID around different ethnicities. And we were able to mobilize and go into communities and provide testing. And the feedback we got from that was just overwhelming, and be able to really drive into neighborhoods, if you will, with some of the resources and assets we have to test people, give them assurance, and then course of action. So that's just one of really many different things. One of the things in our survey tool is we're able to respond in their native language, and then have them respond and interpret back to us. And so actually a cute anecdotal is sometimes our managers at our different sites get a call from someone who might be speaking Spanish, because they just assume, because we provide back the manager's name and their contact information if you have something or anything else that you want to share with us, good or bad. And so they're dealing with a language barrier that because the patient who received it thought that we were Spanish speaking, and that person was Spanish speaking. So it's a good problem to have, to be able to, that people feel comfortable reaching back out to us and that they're heard, and they are.
Great. Well, thank you so much. There's another question that's come in about organizations that are kind of early in their journey and what advice you might have for them. And I think back to, we started the conversation talking about how you actually put some of this piping in place just to sort of have the capability. We're talking about how you adapted during COVID, but having the capability in place first. What advice would you have for somebody at that stage?
Well, I love our process of, if there's a higher calling like a connect to purpose, then you have something to rally around. But what we did is we took really one of our areas where we struggled the most with the patient experience, and we set a stake in the ground from the tip of the sword where the patient's being cared for to the highest levels of the organization, to say, we're going to focus in on this. And then we, through the real-time information, me and my position, I'm able to every day see something that's called voices that comes out as a sampling of what's going on at the clinic. And we're able to use that, and I'm able to, within seconds, send an email with this patient's great response back out to the care provider, the team, the leadership team that's responsible for that, so that they see at all levels of the organization, this matters. And when you do that, especially in an organization such as a healthcare organization where people, as I said, are mostly called to do this work, and they find out that there's a refocus on what really matters. That's one thing. The other thing, and as I said earlier, to make it a core competency, an expectation of every leader in the organization to this experience, we believe will really drive our growth. So there's a financial equation to it, but this is really about a person equation for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that I think sometimes our clients underestimate that power of bringing technology together with culture. And we actually have done some research at Medallia Institute where we've seen, and we can actually measure the impact of employees that actually get that kind of positive recognition and how that impacts things like their likelihood to keep working at the organization. So, this is, the connection with the patient and the customer is not only something that drives the customer or the patient experience, but in fact, it can drive the employee experience too. And I think that's something that a lot of organizations miss. So great advice to start with. Thank you on that. I want to move to the processes that sit around this. I mean, we're getting close to the end of the conversation, but we've talked about the piping you put in place, sort of capabilities. We've talked about this rapid shift and how you listened along the way. Were there ongoing adjustments? I mean, when you think about a process that someone else listening in on today's session, how could they use something like listening to the customer in an agile way to sort of adapt? Were there things you did that required ongoing adjustment?
Yeah, really, I'll go back to the launch of virtual in 24,000 in 1 week from 400 in a week. And initially, the patients were so grateful that we were there for them, right? There was just this outpouring of gratitude. But as weeks and months, as we know in COVID, drug on, it turned into an expectation. And then we went from a really congratulatory to a, hey, you might adjust this. And so again, if our ability to richly look at text analytics, and we might be missing the question, but they're going to tell us if we really look at what they're saying and be able to adjust to that. The other thing is there's just this fundamental thing about bringing accountability to. And so we have monthly meetings with the different teams, and the leadership teams share with each other the things that they did to improve their overall experience. So it's again, I have a lot of faith and confidence in our people if we give them the right tools and the right setup and the right focus to do the right thing. And I think we've done that in a really great way. One of the things that we're adding on or that we're going to next is they've told us that they want to continue to have safe passage. And so we're looking at a digital touchless check-in process for all of our patients to where, well, you might know this, John, but in healthcare, we build waiting rooms for you to wait in, right? And so I think we have over, this is back of the napkin, but I think we have over 500,000 square feet of waiting rooms just for you. but in the current environment we're in, we've had to piecemeal some things together so that patients are kept safe. That's just like every other business. But we're using this technology and their feedback to go ahead and be able to, through bidirectional texting and a chatbot and AI, to be able to bring them in as we're ready for them, as they're ready to come in, as opposed to the old process of chairs and rooms. So a lot there that we're going towards. Again, ours is to seize the moment where patients are actually willing and ready to receive care differently. We've wanted to for quite some time. It's that matching of, we say, in their rhythm of life, not ours. And we feel like the rhythm's changed.
Yeah, well, and we're seeing that across so many industries, this openness. And what we've seen from many of our clients, we saw this in retail as well, is retailers had a capability for you to order online and then pick up at the store or pick up at the curb. But very often it just wasn't utilized that much. What we've seen is this very rapid acceleration of some of the new channels that have already been out there for a while. And I mean, that may be one of the biggest things that this pandemic leaves behind for us is, I'm actually in Oklahoma right now, visiting my parents who are 80 and 92. And we see these populations like them who are adopting digital ways of working and digital ways of doing business that really historically that the impetus wasn't there. And, how are they going to stick with this over time is, I think all businesses are wondering where will they land in the new normal, but there's no question things are very different. I want to wrap up with one last question for you. And I want to say this because I was delighted to have you join us looking at your own results. In the Medallia system, we can see that your patients remain pretty satisfied throughout this disruption. Now, it's not to say that things didn't dip, scores didn't dip, there wasn't critical feedback, but when you look back on the last 6 to 9 months and how things have evolved, what kinds of impacts have you seen? And, are there any takeaways you'd have for the audience based on that?
Well, a couple of things. One, our experience scores are extremely high. We're really proud of that, but there's so much work to be done. So we need to know more so that we can care for patients, right? And so we're not going to stop on those scores. Ours is we don't care about the score. We want to know more. And so we're always trying to be open to that. But the reason for that is we want to always drive a great care experience for the patient. And we think when we do that, we'll drive a really significant net promoter score. And when we do that, patients will really respond to us in social way and post out there about their great experience. And so when we do that, we'll be able to continue to grow in really an unknown environment. And that's one of the things that we've got to do as a business. We've got to drive growth through a reputation, through the patient's experience. And so it's not just something that we feel like we're called to do, but we do it for a very practical reason. We need to grow and gain the favor and of the patients.
Well, thanks a lot. And I think reputation is one thing that will stick with you no matter what the market environment looks like. So we'll wrap up with that. I just want to leave people, hopefully what you took away from today's session, being able to listen to the customer and then use that as you're making these types of rapid changes that we've all had to do through COVID. And then Tom, I think you also called out this idea of sharing ideas. So the power of engaging your own teammate with that feedback so they can come up with better ways of working. And then sort of measuring and seeing how that impacts the customer, but not just focusing on the score, as you said there at the end, because the score helps you understand the impact, but the learning is in what people tell you. And so all of those points, very well put. Thank you for illustrating that through your experience at Atrium. And thank those of you that joined and asked questions. Thank you for your participation. We're going to take a short break, and then the main program is going to resume on the stage tab at 2:15 Eastern. So hopefully we'll see you all there, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.